My name's Rob, CEO of Stealth Group. We've got Dasha here. She's on our panel today. You know, she's an award-winning cyber geek, CISO, president. Actually, big news from last week, she's one of only 25 provisional CMMC assessors in the world. So that's a pretty cool thing.
Not PCI though.
Not PCI, but you do have a PCI qualification though, right?
Yes.
Yes, she's PCIP. We have Mark Segalov, who is CISO, CEO, financial services and cybersecurity consulting veteran who loves PCI. So he jumped at the chance to be on the panel. So he's going to be answering all the questions as far as I'm concerned.
Excellent.
We have Cassandra, who's PCIP. She's CISO, lots of cyber qualifications, GRC veteran, also loves a bit of PCI, right? You can wave at everyone, Cassandra, if you want to. You know who I am. I've been in financial services for more years than I care to mention, but it's over 30, and spent a lot of time with PCI with a couple of companies. So I have a point of view. It might not be accurate, but it's grounded in the real world. And one of my colleagues on one of those programs is Chris Connor, and he's not on the panel, but he's joined us to listen. And I'm sure if he gets excited, he'll chip in as well. So that's the panel. Who else do we have? So Rich was on a previous panel. He thinks he's just listening in today, but I'm sure he won't be able to resist jumping in at some point. And then who else do we have? We have Steve Brown. Steve, would you like to introduce yourself, sir?
Sure. I'm Steve Brown. I'm with TPG Telemanagement here in Omaha, Nebraska. We're just dipping our toe into CMMC. We're going to get there, hopefully, to look at getting into the more federal business. We're into listening and scoring customer service type calls and creating metrics, delivering that back to customers as insights and ROIs.
Awesome. That's I think you come to the right place. So yeah, hopefully you'll enjoy what we come up with.
Yep.
We have Jeff is our new operations manager. Nick is our new sales guy. Chuck, I don't see a surname. Chuck, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us why you're here? Chuck, you're on mute. No?
Some people may be shy.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I always encourage folks to turn your cameras on if you can. That makes it much more of a conversation and less of a kind of diatribe slash, you know, a presentation. It's we would like this to be as interactive as possible. We have a P. Valad. If you would like to, you won't be able to speak, I guess, so you might be in a noisy place, so that's fine. I've just got your message. Okay, you're in a conference room with others. That's absolutely fine. Enjoy the conference. Have a listen in. As I say, if you want to turn cameras on and just get stuck in, that's absolutely fine. The purpose of this is to share insight. There is zero sales pitch. This is purely, we love what we do. We think it's really important. We love to share. Simple as that. And we invite our buddies along just to give their points of view as well. So we get more rounded points of view. Plus, we like to have a bit of a laugh. You can probably tell. I like to have a bit of a joke. These topics can be quite dry. So if anyone wants to inject some humor, you're very welcome. As I say, all of the questions that were posted, they're on slido.com. The code that you need to access the questions or add some new ones is hash 74501. So if you wanted to have the questions to hand, I've been in there, I've taken a look at those, and we're just going to run down those questions. So without further ado, if everyone's comfortable and has a cup of coffee, sit back and relax, and we'll get into the first one. So the first question was, and I think we expanded on the question a little bit because Slido gives you a word limit. So the actual question was, given the financial services industry often deals with a mix of domestic and international clients, Meeting regulatory and compliance requirements is non-negotiable. Yes. What is the best practice for performing due diligence to ensure we remain compliant? So I'd be very happy to give a kind of consultants type answer to that, but I think who from our panel would like to volunteer answering this one? I know Mark's about to put his hand up. Mark.
I have my hands up.
What do you think?
I think from my experience, there are probably a number of different facets here. Certainly within the financial services, they have a concept of 3 lines of defense, which some of you are probably very familiar with. So it's ensuring that you've got a robust 3 lines of defense model, first of all. The second aspect is very much around being able to demonstrate compliance as much as possible. So actually having the evidence and the process to support visibility of what you're doing for compliance is equally as important. And the third thing is certainly some of the larger banks that I've been involved with, like Lloyds and UBS, it's really knowing where are your key risks as well. So very much focusing on what ticks the boxes for some of those organizations and some of your regulatory authorities. So for example, in a UBS or scenario, they had multiple regulatory requirements resulting from Sarbanes-Oxley, from the MAS authority over in Singapore, and of course your external auditors. So it's about being able to have a meta standard, knowing what's important, but focusing on key risks like privileged access management is often key in financial services. Anything to do with access control, a lot to do with third-party assurance as well, and following the trail of data and understanding where your data is. So it's really just trying to narrow your scope down and focusing what's really important, because they are complex beasts.
Absolutely. I think we're going to get more into the third and fourth party question a little later, but I think we can agree that all roads lead to the chief risk officer at this point. You know, they've got the risk register, the enterprise risk register that is fed by the different department heads. And, you know, you need a plan for compliance that makes sure that you address, or at least has a compensating control for those risks where relevant. So, you know, because cost is important, you can't go around fixing everything. So it's understanding the priority of your risks from an enterprise perspective, and then knowing what to do with them. So, and then, you know, we're going to come to this quite a lot, but yeah, the 3 lines are absolutely. But this is all about people, process, and technology. You know, this isn't just about a set of processes. It isn't just about a set of appliances, and it's not just about training your staff to a certain standard. It's about all of those things. And that for me is, you know, if you're ticking those boxes, then compliance becomes easier. And don't forget, being compliant doesn't make you secure. And I know this is a strapline for Stealth. We will. I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll get into that question momentarily, but just bear in mind, just because you adhere to a certain compliance standard, each one of them is different, which means each one of them has pluses and minuses. So that means where you have deficiencies, if you haven't focused on those as part of your compliance activity, then there's risk there as well. So, all right, awesome, thanks, Mark. So next question, managing vendor risk. So here's your third party question. So managing vendor risk is a critical challenge the financial services industry faces, and to be fair, all industries are facing right now. What have you seen to be the most successful approach to managing third-party relationships? So I'm wondering if Cassandra's going to put her hand up for that. She is. There you go. No prompting whatsoever. So Cassandra, over to you.
This one is one of my favorite ones. So I usually get the joyous task of coming to clean up when things are not done correctly. So my view is more from starting with the end in mind and making sure that you're protecting yourself, but also building that relationship with your vendor. I think it's really critical that you set the expectations up front with them and let them know that their security has to follow the mandates of you as the customer. And it has to be put in writing in the contract to protect yourself later on if you run into an issue. So what that means really is you need to make sure that they understand what your security requirements are and what you need to comply with and when you need to comply with them. You also need to be building in your contract and your expectations with that vendor and any of their, sub vendors, a right to audit their systems and their processes at any time. But working with them in a relationship oriented way to say, look, every quarter we want to take a look. We would like for you to proactively provide that to us so that we don't have to be invasive about it, but we do need to make sure that it's happening. The other piece here is you've got to make sure that there's SLAs built in there that state when this information.
Oh, I think we lost Cassandra for a second. Hopefully she'll catch up. If not, I think I know where she was going with that. So trust but verify is key. Right to audit is essential. So when you're writing contracts with your third party,
provided in a program. There's just very much.
Yeah, sorry, Cassandra. It's so clipped we can't make sense of that one. But I think the point was well made. I think we got that point. Any questions on that particular point? Yeah, trust but verify, right to audit, frequent checks. I would add, monitoring those connections from a network perspective and keeping logs of traffic. All of those things are really useful. Mark?
Just one thing to add. I think it's very important to talk the same language as well. I think that's often lost with suppliers and third parties. So using standard terminology around standard frameworks. So each third party has a multitude of requirements from a multitude of customers. So it's about trying to be approaching it from a standards perspective, whether ISO or NIST, etc.
Okay, and also a shared nomenclature as well. So getting your acronyms fully understood and listed, and so that you're both absolutely speaking from the same page. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Thank you. So next question that we had on, by the way, Slido.com for those that have just joined, Slido.com #74501 if you wanted to ask any question or just look at the questions that have been posed. On to the next question. How should we go about managing the threat of internal personnel causing a data breach or security incident? Now, I know for a fact Mr. Segalov is going to jump all over this one. So over to you, Mark. You're just on mute. For there you go.
Unmute. Right, where do you start? So it is, I think it's all about culture. What's important is that security is embedded as part of the DNA of an organization. That is probably one of the most important things that very few companies really get right. So to do that, it's not about just a security program or a training program. It's actually understanding how that business operates and connecting the security into how a business processes all the different functions. So whether within, so for example, without going too far down the PCI rate, PCI-DSS, call centers, taking payments, understanding that business process is very key to ensuring that those people understand what security is relevant for their role. And that's probably the most important thing in ensuring that you can help minimize, I suppose, the accidental element with respect to a security breach. Now, obviously, from a more deliberate or angle, then it's very much looking at your employee screening, understanding your employee, not just before they are hired, but also understanding and being close to them throughout the duration of their employment as well. So, noticing if there are issues or whether personal issues that may impact one's performance or one's ability to, let's just say, stay on the straight and narrow. So it's about really taking care of your employees as well, or your staff as well, and being close to them and really understanding what's going on. And then you've also got some of the more, I suppose, more of the detective controls in place, but obviously there are some privacy implications, so you have to obviously balance what is appropriate as well based on that.
Sure. I mean,
So
again, there's a trust but verify element to that as well. So technology can be used just to verify that, you know, what's happening should be happening, and can look for anomalous traffic and stuff like that. So yeah, great answer. Thank you very much. Cassandra, you're back. Thank you.
Yes.
Awesome. So next question, as technology continues to develop and we move towards a cashless society, how should the financial services industry consider the challenges of securing things like mobile and web applications? Any takers? I think Dasha would like to answer that one.
I mean, it really does not, I don't think it actually is the financial institution unless they develop their own tools and their own mobile applications to process it. Right now, it really comes down to everyone who is putting some kind of application out, might it be PayPal, might it be anyone else who developed their tools, that they need to actually adhere to the security best practices. And that's not really PCI related. It has anything, it's OWASP, pen testing, it's proper code review, and using the entire software development lifecycle with security in it to make it sure. So, and every time there's some updates, it actually gets tested before it goes out in the public.
Right. So secure by design, testing, all of the good toys around dual factor authentication, tokens, encryption, all of those things. So I think, you know, less secure applications are falling by the wayside because everyone, certainly within the financial services industry, whatever mobile banking app that you have, if that was deemed insecure, then you might raise questions to that particular financial institution. So in a way, having very secure access to your money is almost, it was a differentiator, but I think everyone's pretty much on the same page now. So Jim, I saw you nodding on that. Did you want to
Yeah, I'm just wondering where you may be going with that in terms of the digitization of the dollar, right? Is it beyond just the transaction services on these platforms, or is the question geared towards the digitization? The thing I'm thinking, if we look back at history, and you go back into why the dollar is green today, right? That history basically was every bank had their own notes, right? And there was all kinds of exchange rates between them, very, very complicated mix to manage until you had a structure like the Federal Reserve come into place, where they say it's going to be one across the United States. We have a standard, we have a dollar. I think standardization, as we get into monetization or digitization of the dollar, is going to become a huge thing. So it actually, in some weird ways, there's potential for it to get a lot simpler, I think, if, the dollar were managed, say, out of a federal bank, right? And that those bits and those and that virtual currency were managed out of a central bank. There'd be a great way to have standardization, much as they did with making the dollar green back in the 1800s.
Right. That's a segue into blockchain technologies right there. So yeah, the federation of, the non-federation of these different exchanges, has its pluses and minuses. And I think we have a blockchain question in a bit. So in fact, we have a blockchain question now, because question 5, I think, was another one about third and fourth party vendors, which we've covered. Next question was, how should we approach emerging technology, blockchain and IoT, knowing their risk is high? So for me, these are two totally different questions. One, blockchain is designed to be inherently secure, and you have a visibility of the ledger and the entirety of the ledger, whereas IoT is a kind of an amorphous adhocracy of potential devices that might be connecting to your network. So if we take the question in two parts, Jim, did you want to take the blockchain part?
Don't know. I think you just hit it, right? I think, in terms of the blockchain stuff, it's inherently designed to be more secure, which again, I'm intrigued to see where that goes. I really do think there's such a future there. I just think of everything we do in password management, everything we do just becomes so much more streamlined and so much more robust.
For sure.
But I also think for financial institutions that presents a bit of a problem. While there is, the opportunity to reduce fraud is going to be significant. But when fraud does occur, it's going to be that much more challenging to find.
Yeah,
So,
for sure. On to the so there have been, if you like, breaches within, I guess, the blockchain system. I would argue that those breaches have been due to lack of adherence to secure by design and appropriate testing and following OWASP and things like that, to Dash's earlier point. But you know, each one of those application vendors would argue differently, I'm sure. But so onto IoT then. IoT and financial services for me right now, and this is kind of topical because of COVID. You know, a lot of perhaps smaller banks have asked their folks to work from home, and in some cases, perhaps they haven't had a resilient enterprise set of tools to deploy to home initially. Anyway, I'm sure they've all caught up now. And I'm sure in some cases, companies were asking folks to work from home using their own devices. And that for me is I see kind of bring your own device and Internet of Things as mostly joined. So yes, that was proven to be a risk because there were breaches via kind of home working, if you like. I think the world has moved on from that. I think with COVID, there's actually a greater awareness of that and security. I think one of the plus points of COVID has been the general awareness that actually the internet isn't necessarily as safe as you thought it was, and folks are getting better educated on that. So for me, this just comes back to people, process, and technology. If you are encouraging bring your own device as a financial services organization, you absolutely have to wrap that up in policy and procedure. You absolutely have to train your staff on what's acceptable, and you absolutely have to have technology in place to check that, you know, access to corporate information assets, you know, confidentiality, integrity, and availability are maintained. So Jim, I don't know if you wanted to add to that.
yeah, I think it goes right back to what Mark was saying a little bit earlier. It's really embedded in your culture. If that hygiene and good cyber hygiene is you know, imbued into your staff, and it's a part of who they are, security is viewed as a shared responsibility. I do think you're right on the money there, Robert.
Great, thanks, guys. Mark, did you have anything more? Because you know, these are such big questions; they kind of deserve bigger answers. So, did you want to chip in?
Yeah, I think obviously with COVID, remote working was here before, but the huge acceleration and the timescale to which it had to happen is what caused it, I suppose, inherently, vulnerabilities to be introduced, not because of the technology or the actual underlying change. It was just the pace of change and the ability to move quickly. So I think what will happen is perhaps a few months or even years down the line, due to that pace of change, only then those organizations that perhaps aren't as good as monitoring incidents or breaches will start to realize that maybe they may have introduced one or two threats they were unaware of, and those organizations that are perhaps more proactive would have prevented that at this point in time. So
I think you're right. I think issues. Back to that trust but verify. I think the verify was playing catch up a little bit. Awesome, thanks guys. So next question, another kind of big wide question. So how can we avoid failing to accurately strategize compliance efforts? So I have my point of view on this one, but I'll share that last. Cassandra, what say you on this one? How can we avoid failing to accurately strategize compliance efforts?
I think the biggest thing is, and I'm getting the connection unstable again, so I'll talk quick. I think that everyone knows PCI is important, but oftentimes the senior leadership team does not carve out the appropriate space and environment and funding and resourcing strategy to be able to accomplish it and really continue it on an ongoing basis to make sure that it gets done correctly. And then you end up with people trying to mad dash at the end and throw bodies at the problem. So I think that's the biggest overarching thing that I see in the industries that I work with.
For sure, it's compliance efforts are aligned to frameworks, and especially PCI. It is argued that it's a little ambiguous and it's a little expensive. So without the right, and these are not these efforts don't take months. They can take years for kind of higher tier merchants. Myself and a couple of guys on this call worked for 3-4 years on a PCI compliance certification project for a huge insurance company. So you have to make sure that your budget line is as ring fenced as it possibly can be. So one of the experiences we had was budget team being taken away from this particular compliance effort because there were more pressing business imperatives. And the business was more inclined to take the fine than because they had to spend that money on something more pressing. So because they're multi-year efforts, these types of things do come into play. But you do need a plan. I think PCI does, if nothing else, it does give you a framework for where you should be looking. But again, being compliant doesn't make you secure. You need to be aware of, with PCI and the card processing environment specifically, you can take things out of scope of compliance by making sure that they don't touch any credit card data. So all of a sudden, if your compliance activity and you're looking at that to make you secure, and that's your boundary, you've just taken some things out and put them outside your boundary. And so how are you going to make those secure if they're not part of PCI? So
I have a question.
Okay, Dasha.
So to compliance, PCI itself has the workaround where if you're not compliant, you can still put compensating control in place. You could put a project plan together.
Yep.
You can have that basically everything and all that is non-compliant. You can have a compensating control around it, which pretty much puts you into non-compliant status, but you can still do business. So what's the point of having PCI and trying to make it all secure if everybody pretty much can bypass it?
I think that's a multi-headed question, and there's a big answer to that as well. But one of the points would be being PCI certified is a differentiator for some companies. So to say you're PCI certified, it doesn't matter if you've got compensating controls or not. Being certified by the PCI Council can be a differentiator versus your competition. But you're right, and this is to my point about PCI can be a little ambiguous, and it's there are a lot of criticisms of PCI, that being one of them. But I believe, Mark, when was the last time the PCI standard was changed? Do you know, or updated?
A couple of years ago.
It was a couple of years ago, wasn't it?
Very recently. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very recently in the grand scheme of things. I think there's probably one other thing to add about compensating controls as well. Depending on what level merchant you are, depends on obviously the degree of rigor that you obviously assess that you're compliant. But with a compensating control, you still need to be able to demonstrate, for example, to a QSA that compensating control is as equal to, or if not better than, the original control itself. So compliance is always there's an art to PCI compliance, and it's about how you I suppose take your QSA assessor on the same journey with you, and that's probably just as important to managing that relationship and with the acquirer than it is to actually become compliant itself. So
we saw that
it's compliance with a bit of risk. We've
saw
been
that.
there, done that.
It's a conversation. You're right. It's an art and a science all mixed in together. But I think that the assessor tends to take a relatively holistic view, and that so there might be one or two things where maybe the compensating control isn't as strong as the actual control itself, but given their job is to take a step back and take a holistic view, and they think, well, on balance, there are other things over here that, on balance, this is a relatively secure organization versus its peers. So, but that's part of the conversation that you have with your QSA.
And it's also important.
Oh, sorry, Chris.
I was just wondering whether it's okay if I chip in with a memory of a compensating control that we had.
Yes.
About call recordings.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember that, and Mark remembers that.
Yep.
I thought the interesting thing about that was the degree that the acquirer managed us through that process.
Right.
And they kept us a very close eye on our progress towards closing down that compensating control. So, I mean, from that point of view, it was quite effective. It got us over the line in terms of our compliance, but they still made sure that we closed it down.
For sure. And that actually raises an interesting point that nobody has asked. With PCI, you know, call centers take credit card details over the phone. So all of a sudden your call recording systems are in scope for PCI. So that, just as an aside, that was probably one of the more interesting projects within the program that we ran. I was fascinated by that, and that was quite a difficult thing to do, but you're absolutely right. We did receive a lot of guidance and counsel on what good looked like, which was really good. Okay, thanks guys. I really enjoyed that one. So next one, security controls must be implemented in order to reach peak compliance. I'm not sure about peak compliance. I don't know if you know, it's kind of binary, isn't it? How can we adapt security solutions as a means of risk mitigation, monitoring and control without resulting in performance management issues? So for me, this question was a slightly kind of open-ended. I wasn't sure if it was about system performance or organizational performance. If for me, the former, there are tools out there that can monitor things, and you can set the amount of the threshold of system performance that you're allowed to allow that process to run. But let's take this as a more kind of systemic or an organizational performance issue. So Mark, security controls must be implemented in order to reach peak compliance for PCI. How can we adapt security solutions as a means of risk mitigation, monitoring and control without resulting in organizational performance management issues?
I'm going to, I'm just trying to read that question in a way that it comes sort of like touches on what we just mentioned before. It's about trying to, for me, it's always about trying to right-size compliance for an organization. So no matter no matter which control you're looking at, or which or what your key assets are, I think understanding the business context, the business drivers, what is really important in the context of an organization. So for example, PCI-DSS is quite in, you know, credit card data, but then we're looking at volumes as well. So, and we're looking at those large volumes, or those volumes that are included in automated processes as well. Those are the key aspects. We're not looking at like ancillary data that may be stored somewhere, but so we need to just kind of focus in on what's really important in the context of what we're trying to achieve for compliance. The other thing as well, so, you know, if we're talking about performance, for example, on security monitoring as well, for me, it's all about having actionable intelligence. I don't want to be bombarded with lots and lots of log data that I cannot consume or cannot take actionable action on those 2 or 3 issues that may be arising each day. I want something that I can just consume and deal with it. Some banks, obviously, they're geared up and have huge SOCs and huge instant response teams. Other smaller financial institutions don't have that luxury and require, obviously, a really, you know, having an outsourced partner to support them through that process and provides that key issue, so it doesn't impact my day-to-day job. I think that's the key thing. Obviously, I'm security, so I expect to be dealing with a bit of that, but I don't want everyone else to having to overwhelm them. And just, I think that's also the balance, is understanding your organization and the response and the ability for your organization to consume whatever you're delivering.
Right. So I did come up with an analogy for that. So I'm pretty sure your phone would run ever so slightly quicker if you took all of your passwords off it, right? But you know, you can't really do that in an organization. So it's almost the cost of being secure is a slight performance hit. But I look on the positive. Sometimes it gives you an opportunity to look at your internal business processes and make them more secure and actually streamline them and make them better. So, you know, that's something that I would look at. But on the whole, you know, you can't, you know, be more secure and there not be some sort of trade-off somewhere, I think. So
I think the other thing as well with financial organizations as well, trust is extremely important to the consumer and customer. So more and more, certainly over the last 5 years plus, security is often sold as a beneficial marketing differentiator as well. So you'll see so many marketing campaigns with financial services around protecting your money, for anti-fraud, all these different things. So it's a lot. So there is a positive spin about customer retention and obviously building that trust as well.
I think Jim wants to.
Yeah, there's a magic trick in that, right? I mean, you know, Robert, you bring up a great point before about there's a big push for frictionless. We want as little friction in the customer experience as humanly possible. When you're dealing with financial assets and things, maybe a little bit of friction is good. But I think it's really about how you introduce that friction and when you introduce that friction. And this is where I think security could be viewed as an enabler to the business. We want to keep those transactions as safe as possible. And if we can work through automation, algorithmically, looking for those red flags and giving just the ones that Mark talked about earlier, about give me something that's actionable, that we're not drinking from the fire hose here. There's a lot of those flags. You trip enough of those flags, your tool then introduces the friction of, hey, maybe I need you to give me your password now, right? You can be, there's a very fine line, you know, business-wise between that friction, and, you know, the friction we want as security people, but the friction that the business doesn't want because they want to retain customers and they want to make it as absolutely simple as possible for their customers. I think there's a third way where security can help enable that, right? Through automation, through tools with, you know, algorithms and ML and AI that can really, especially if you've got that kind of volume. I think of something like a PayPal, right? Where you've got that kind of transaction volume, those engines can learn rather rapidly. So, and then you're faced with just, you know, the exception handling that you want to be faced with as a security manager.
Yeah, great
but
point.
You're integral to the trust you want your customers to have, right, in your platform, right? That's right. Integral. It's baked into, you know, one of the reasons I think I use PayPal is because I feel secure there, right? It's so that I think is, you know, part of your product is going to be, you know, that security message that your funds are going to be safe with.
Especially in financial services, because it's your money, right? You've worked hard for that. It's personal.
It's very real quick.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah, great. Thanks, Jim. Cassandra, did you want to jump in on that one? I saw you raise your hand, sorry.
I was just, I was thinking, it sounds so luxurious now after I've left big banking and gone to help the smaller fish in the sea, because they really don't have the money to use automated tools or any of the fancy things that are out. More about going back to basics. And I think there is a very large cross-section of the blue ocean that needs critical thinking skills and helping them come up with their compensating controls, because they really need to strategically think about where they're going to spend the dollars that they have to figure out which ones are going to be automated tools and which ones are really people and process that need to be addressed, because they don't have that ingrained security culture or really a risk management mindset. So it's definitely a particular challenge for those of us that are used to having money to buy things and then going to help others to get through their PCI challenges.
For sure. It really is about bang for the buck, isn't it, at that point? Yeah, great. Great insight. Thank you. Okay, we've got another kind of wide-ranging kind of strategic question for the panel. So how do we make sure our compliance requirements are fitting into the larger security objectives? How can we ensure they address the ever-growing range of cybersecurity challenges we may encounter? So we've kind of touched on this, and I think Dasha wants to have a crack at this one, actually.
Yeah, I think, and this goes back to cybersecurity as a standard and as a building it part into the culture, into daily operations, has not really much to do with PCI or HIPAA or CMMC or anything. It's just every single company needs to be aware that security is a requirement now. It is actually a business enabler, because otherwise you can't process credit card, you can't play with the DoD, you can't be in the healthcare industry. And yeah, things change. It is part of doing business. Just like 50 years ago, we didn't have TVs and handheld devices. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we didn't have firewalls. Now we need them. Going forward, we will need double and triple encryption and have AI and automation. So I think it's part of doing business. You have to keep up. You have to upgrade your technology. You have to stay with the standards. You have to keep track of what what is coming our way, and what and also maintaining and educating your staff, your employees, of what their requirements are on security. It's I think it's really just going on with it. It keeps changing, and just like 30, 40 years ago, we did not have credit cards. We have credit cards now. You just have to get on with it.
So it's an evolution.
Yep.
So the question for me then becomes, okay, as a small business owner, and I'm very good at manufacturing my widgets, but I'm no cybersecurity expert. You're telling me I need to keep an eye on the future. How do I do that?
Well, just like for anything else, if you have a house, you don't try to fix your electricity yourself. You get in a professional.
Okay.
So it's part of doing business. It's the cost. You get the people that are professionals in their areas to help you, to guide you. And the good thing with today is you do not need a full-time CISO. You do not need a full-time
Doesn't have to be a permanent member of staff,
exactly.
Right? Yeah.
There's a lot of companies out there that provide the fractional services that you can ask even freelancer to support you as a business, to advise you, especially to what Cassandra said, is the small businesses that just don't have the knowledge, that don't have the tools, that don't have the budget. You can still keep up with it, and especially in PCI, and also applies to CMMC and everything else, is define the scope. You don't have to put the security controls across the entire enterprise. You can really make sure that your scope for a particular security requirement is as small as possible. And that's also where consultants can help you and make sure you don't overspend money for where you don't need it.
Right. So that potentially checks your certification box. But as I mentioned previously, you may just have taken some things out of your security scope that actually are quite important. So there is a balance between the two, right?
Yeah, but sometimes taking something out of scope, which is a risk, and you give it to somebody else. For example, if I want to be a credit card processor, well, I can get a POS here, or I can just give it to a third party and have them manage the risk. And it might actually be cheaper than me going through a whole PCI certification and getting the SIM tool and the monitoring and everything in place.
Right. So there's a concept in PCI around tokenization, where instead of sending PAN data, you're actually sending a token, and there's a database that translates the two. So yeah, as a compensating control, I guess that's definitely something that we looked at previously. So yeah, but I guess it comes back to the point. You might be expert at manufacturing widgets. The counsel, I guess, would be find somebody that you trust that and get a different point of view. Jim, did I see you wanted to jump in on that one?
No, I just really I want to thank Dasha for the historical context there, because it's no small thing, right? This is still, we talk about 20 or 30 years. This is all brand new stuff, right? I mean, in the context, this has got nowhere near the maturity of, say, your city's subway system or the electrical power grid or lighting. There's nowhere near this kind of maturity here. And the rate of change is good.
I think what complicates this. Sorry, Jen.
Go ahead.
I think what complicates what we're trying to do here is that so many software companies ran out and built something, and they went out with all these fancy bells and whistles, and small to medium-sized businesses with some money to spend are able to justify to their boards that, hey, we need this thing, and they get duped into buying things that they either don't need or don't function properly because they don't understand doing a proof of concept and having solid use cases. So that's where someone with security expertise can come in and help to at least get you started off right, so that you don't find yourself having to go back and apologize for misspending money that you didn't
That's
have.
exactly where I was going with this.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So actually, for the new company, if done right, and really the critical thinking is done up front, and I think, Cassandra, you're 100% on the money. There are places, and I know one of the challenges I had, one of the last places I was working was, you know, the number of tools we had was because I needed 2% of this tool, 1% of that tool,
Right.
5% of this tool. We had the amount of money being spent on tools, the deluge of possibilities and tools and capabilities. People have to step back from that and really start thinking about
Right.
ring 1, 2, and 3. What are we trying to secure, and how are we
Yes.
trying to do that? This is,
Right.
if you step back and take the time, like in any Six Sigma project, I tell you, the most amount of your time should actually be spent on defining what your problem is, right? What are we doing here? If we can do that, I think the new guy actually wins, because or the new gal actually wins, because they get that, they can get some really, really incredible technology on relatively on the cheap, right? To do some really incredible things because of what's there now. You know, I think the problem comes in if you've got legacy trouble. That's where things start to get hairy, because you've got all these other problems to deal with. But if you're new and you're coming in and you don't have a ton of money, identifying what it is you're actually trying to do, you can make, I think you can make a pretty robust system for, you know, a lot less investment, say, than somebody who's dealing with a legacy.
Totally agree. Totally agree. I think with the rate of change, I think not hiring some expert counsel is a false economy. I think we're all in violent agreement on that. I think, Mark, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, they're pretty two angles. I think you just mentioned, obviously, the expertise. I think there is I use to, not to be disingenuous, but sometimes I use the phrase like making sure you've got an intelligent customer, but in a way that they actually understand what they need to be able, or the right capability to be able to get them to where they need to go. And sometimes the guidance out there may not necessarily steer them in the right direction. And that needs to happen right at the top as well. So it's recognizing I've got a problem here. And then secondly, recognizing, right, before I go into the technology space, it's not a technology problem. What is the business challenge I'm trying to address? The second part to that is no matter what size or organization, in theory, I say in theory because it's not always happens in practice, you know, organizations at the senior level should be thinking about how their security strategy aligns with their business strategy. I use the term strategy, obviously it's different for a big financial compared to an SME, but a strategy for an SME may be in their head. But it's just making sure that that security strategy is thought through and looked at top down, very much from what are their business drivers, what are their regulatory drivers, what are their compliance drivers, what are their key risks, not every single risk because you can get lost in the weeds, but what are the key material risks at that organization? And also what are the business opportunities? And if you understand that context, then you can clearly lay out a series of prioritized controls, for want of a better phrase. It could be a PCI related control catalog. It could be a meta catalog that has all your compliance and risk drivers. And then you can start thinking about how do you actually meet those controls today, either through technology, people, process, or technology. But the one thing I find lacking in a lot of organizations is the ability to pull that together, the governance aspect, the leadership aspect, because that's what needs to happen to really make all those other three really effective. Totally. And that's the job of everyone in security, CISO, but also the wider business to sell the need for things like that.
I think that's the danger of the pace of this industry, because I think we're so out there, or customers are generally out there trying to buy tools, right? Tools, get me the tools I need to do this. And they really haven't thought about their people, their processes. You know, tools are predicated on processes. Processes are predicated on policies. Have we actually, how many places have you walked into where's the policy? And there's nothing, right? You know,
it's a virtuous circle, isn't it? Those three are so interjoined. Cassandra, I saw you lean into this. I suspect you want to jump in.
I was just thinking, integration is always an afterthought, and it presents so many challenges that really create technical debt in an organization that's very hard to overcome in the long run. So it's super important to think about every single time you're thinking about buying something, you know, what are the impacts to the other things that you have, or what you are looking at further down on your product roadmap or service roadmap. Because what I find, even in big banks and financial institutions, they go with an integrator that they think has all these shiny bells and whistles, and they get midway through their implementation and they realize, crap, this isn't going to allow business banking like I thought it would, or they really don't have a product that they promised me. You know, so you need to do your due diligence and make sure you're really getting what you think you're getting.
Yeah, for sure. Business impact
afterward. You know, you have to have support afterward to help you with your growth strategy.
Yeah. So business impact analysis, BIA, you know, just talk to somebody that's done it before. You'll be surprised at the insight that you'll gain from that. And overall, you will save money and deliver quicker. Is all of our experience around this table. So yeah, but we would say that, right?
Yeah, I think from our PCI program, the one that we are all familiar, a few of us are familiar with, one of the things that, especially when it's a multi-year program, showing benefit realization, whether it's control improvement, maturity improvement, or I'm not going to say cost improvement because it's not always possible, or risk benefit. That's so important along that journey to maintain that buy-in at the right level and maintain the investment that you need, but not just maintain the investment, but demonstrate that investment is effective. So I would overlay the whole measurement aspect as well, and reporting.
That's a really good point. Really good point. You know, whoever's managing that program for you needs to be continuously in touch with key stakeholders, explaining what just happened, what the benefit of that was, what is about to happen. Because not only do you maintain visibility of your program and how important it is, but you also, because it's still in the mind of the decision makers and the budget holders, then you're more likely to, when it comes to next year's budget decision, they can see, oh yeah, this was really good for us and we got these benefits, so yes, let's continue. So yeah, good point.
That's really, go ahead, Chris.
Sorry, Chris.
Oh, all I was going to add to that was you just reminded me of that point we reached in the program early on, where we actually were getting some pretty poor advice, and I think from an organization's point of view, it is sometimes difficult to tell whether you're getting good advice or not.
Mm-hmm.
And making a judgment as to whether you're choosing the right option. I mean, fortunately, we had people in-house like Mark. I think Ash was there at the time, as well as you, Rob. And we did change direction, but you know, we could easily have carried on spending money on an approach that wasn't really going to work, or was going to be extremely expensive.
Right.
And getting the right advice is quite tricky. And knowing whether you're getting the right advice is a difficult one.
Right. So the message I'm getting from that is actually sometimes you might just want to get a second opinion. Yeah, not just go with one firm or person, but get a rounded opinion. But yeah, do find folks that have done it before.
I would add to what Mark was saying too about the measurement of some of these things, right? Because you're right, the cost benefit is not always there, right? To look at it and say, I got to spend the money to do what? How you're reducing risk is going to be critical. I think if you go through some of those business impact analysis and you identify vulnerabilities, you've got to come into that with some kind of a scoring mechanism, right? That you can look at every one of these vulnerabilities in a list and you can score them, you know, in some way to say these are, you know, actually you can go look at something that engineers have done, failure modes effect analysis, right? You can look at something like that and come up with some kind of a number that says, you know, this is how frequent this is going to happen, or how likely it's going to happen, how big it would be if it happened on a scale of 1 to 10, you know, and you know, you can come up with some multiple for these things and you can rank them. So if you have $1,000 to spend, I can look at this and list, I can say, well, for the $1,000, that's probably the single biggest thing I can do. And in doing that, I can say, here's what the risk looks like before the fix, and here's what the risk looks like after the fix. And that score is now some difference. And you can say, I've reduced that risk by, you know,
so many
75%, right?
So
you give them a quantifiable number to look at that stuff. So I think
for sure, cost versus risk is something that we look at, and without selling a thing, because there are many tools available on the market, but we actually use a tool that assigns a financial dollar value to the information asset, be it a PAN, be it PII, be it anything you like, right? We can scan environments. And so when you're having that conversation, I can't share a story because we're still under NDA, but we had quite an interesting conversation with the president of a very large organization whereby I accidentally managed to find my way into the back of their finance server while I was waiting for the meeting. And over time, we scanned that server, and there was $500 million worth of information asset on that server. And I said to him, you know, I was sat in the bar on my phone with a commercially available kind of penetration testing app, and I managed to get a login prompt to this particular server. So those are compelling stories because your CFO doesn't understand cyber and doesn't want to, but you give them $1, say this is $500 million at risk here, that you're more likely to get it. Could you fix that quickly, please? So yeah, it's about choosing the vocabulary and the language of the stakeholder that you're in the room with. So us as security professionals, we can chat with each other all day about cybersecurity, but we have to understand the decision makers don't really speak our language, and it's us that has to adapt. We have to adapt our vocabulary to put these risks across in terms that they understand, so that we can all be doing the right thing. So with that in mind, I've got 1 minute for questions. This was such a great webinar. Any questions around the room? Emmy, did we get any new questions that we could handle in literally 30 seconds? No. Okay, good. So I'm going to have to close because I know folks have time boxed. A sincere thank you to everyone that joined. I hope you had a bit of a laugh with it. We tried to make it not too dry. Hope you learned something. If anyone's got any more questions, reach out to myself or anyone on the Stealth Group team here. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Jim. I know you weren't officially a panelist, but you jumped in anyway. That's fantastic. We love you for that. And for everyone else that joined, we hope you found it informative. I'm going to sign off now. You've got our contact details if you need anything. And thanks, and have a great rest of the day. Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.